Welcome to the annual Day of Reason. Thank you. The annual Day of Reason event is hosted by Minnesota Atheists. It is held on the same day as the Day of Prayer. As you may have seen, there's a bunch of individuals with good intentions praying on the front steps of the state capitol building. We are here today to show that not everybody believes in the power of prayer, and there is a secular voice to be heard. We believe, as atheists, we believe in reason. We have a full schedule today, so I'm not going to spend much time before introducing our very first speaker. Our first speaker is Hersey Hertz. She is a board member of Minnesota Atheists. So everyone welcome, Hersey Hertz.
Thank you very much, Heather. Good afternoon, friends, allies, and politicians. Thank you for joining us. I've been a part of Minnesota Atheists for about 4 years now, and in my time with this amazing group, I found that the politics varied in the atheist community, just like any other community where there's a large number of people. But has anyone really looked at the non-religious politics? Anecdotal stories aren't a good basis for science. We need to find someone who's specializing in the politics of America's non-religious. Maybe with a catchy title like No Church in the Wild. Well, we have found this person going into brave new territory, Mr. Evan M. Stewart, all the way from the University of Minnesota. He has a bachelor's degree in political theory and science, social relations, and policy from the Michigan State University James Madison College. He's received his master's in sociology from the University of Minnesota and is currently working on his PhD. He is also currently the graduate editor of the Society Pages. So I'd like you to join me in welcoming Evan M. Stewart.
Well, that was a lovely introduction. Thank you very much, Hersey. And good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for having me. A big thank you to Minnesota Atheists for inviting me out for the Day of Reason today. Again, my name is Evan Stewart. I'm a doctoral candidate in sociology at the University of Minnesota. And my research focuses on America's growing religiously unaffiliated population. So that includes atheists, agnostics, spiritual but not religious folks, and the broad swath of the American population that identifies as nothing in particular. This year's Day of Reason comes on the heels of some very big changes at the national level in the United States. The U.S. House of Representatives just announced the formation of a new Congressional Free Thought Caucus to, quote, promote public policy based on reason and science, to protect the secular character of our government, and to champion the value of freedom of thought worldwide. Now, as a researcher in sociology and political psychology, I study the political engagement of these very non-religious Americans. I study whether they turn out to vote. I study how they think about different political issues. And so Minnesota Atheists has asked me here today to just sort of give you a little idea of what the research has said, sort of set the context a little bit for our conversation. I'm especially excited to be here today talking to representatives, talking to staffers, because your constituencies are changing, right? Your constituencies are changing. Over the past 30 years, the number of religiously unaffiliated Americans has risen at a quick clip. Today, that number is between 1/4 and 1/5 of the US population. About 23% of Americans have no religious affiliation. That number has been on the rise since the 1980s. Now, research has studied this group and investigated their motivations for leaving religious institutions. For some people, it's a matter of politics, right? They feel that their political views no longer align with the religious institutions that they belong to. For other people, it's a general distrust of American social institutions, right? Folks who volunteer less often or go to church less often. But these two big, broad social trends have added up to a pretty big change in the electorate. According to a recent report from the Pew Research Center, unaffiliated Americans are now a quarter of registered voters in the United States. 1/4 of registered voters in the United States. And as Minnesota Atheists has set the theme for our discussion today, as atheism is nonpartisan, there's a very particular message here for representatives on both sides of the aisle. The number of religiously unaffiliated Republicans has doubled in the last 20 years. They're now 13% of the Republican Party. The number of unaffiliated Democrats has tripled in the last 20 years. They're now 33% of registered Democrats. So we know that religious disaffiliation is affecting both political parties. It's affecting political constituencies with a broad swath of views. But recent reports have suggested that religiously unaffiliated people might not be more likely than other folks to turn out to vote, to show up to campaigns, to volunteer. In my own research, I've investigated this directly, and there are some very important findings that I think are relevant for both the folks here and really everyone in this Capitol. First off, my own research with voter turnout has shown that the number of religiously unaffiliated Americans who turn out to vote is comparable to the number of affiliated Americans who turn out to vote. Atheists and agnostics turn out to vote at the same rate as Protestant voters, as Catholic voters, as Jewish voters. And the folks who call themselves nothing in particular, the broad religiously unaffiliated folks, they're catching up. They're turning out at higher rates in 2014 and 2016 than they turned out in 2008 and in 2014. I saw a shirt in the audience, the I'm secular and I vote shirt, right, sir? You're not alone, right? This is a real trend we see in the data. And most importantly, conventional reports from exit polls are underestimating this turnout, right? This study specifically used validated voter turnout from validated government records, validated government voter records, as opposed to exit polling. And we get a higher rate of turnout among the religiously unaffiliated. My colleagues at the University of Minnesota, Dr. Penny Edgell and Jacqueline Frost, have recently published research showing that atheists and agnostics volunteer in their communities at the same rate as religiously affiliated people, excuse me. So what we're seeing today in the United States is a changing social context, right? In which religious affiliation, belonging to a religious congregation, having a religious identity, is less and less predictive of whether or not someone's going to get involved in politics, of whether or not someone's going to get involved in their communities. And other research by my colleagues at other universities has shown that unaffiliated people have a wide range of political beliefs. Libertarianism is especially popular amongst many unaffiliated people. Many unaffiliated people are politically progressive, but there's a wide diversity of opinion. And in my work on public opinion, I show that the nothing in particulars are actually quite closer to political centrists than explicit liberals or conservatives. Now, what does this mean for Minnesota? We can drill down into local politics for local representatives using survey data, again, from the Pew Research Center. The secular population in Minnesota looks very, very similar to the national population. We have the same proportion of atheists, same proportion of agnostics, same proportion of nothing in particulars. And compared to the national population of non-religious people, secular Minnesotans are more likely to volunteer. But secular Minnesotans are also less likely to say that religious institutions bring people together and that religious institutions foster communities in their local home communities. What this shows is that these issues are happening on a national scale, but they also matter on a very local level, right, for people here in these communities and for local representatives and for their staffers. Right? I think really this work altogether has sort of three big implications for our audience today, for all of you. For representatives, you need to know that the unaffiliated are growing, You need to know that your constituencies may be changing, but you also need to know that when people leave religious institutions, they're not necessarily dropping out of civil society, right? Folks who leave religious institutions are politically engaged, they are politically active, they're active in their communities, they volunteer. And candidates who can court this group stand to do very well in future elections. This holds across the aisle, right? Atheism truly is nonpartisan in this data that we're looking at. For advocacy groups or community groups like Minnesota Atheists, like the Secular Coalition, it's important to remember that atheists and agnostics are a small subset of the broader population of religiously unaffiliated people in the United States. And so I would encourage these groups to think about how we broaden our base, right? How we think beyond the issues of simply atheism or agnosticism to capture the close to quarter of the American population that has no religious affiliation right now, right? What issues are we advocating for, right? What issues do we care about? Are they issues that this broader constituency cares about? And how do we connect this broader constituency with their representatives, right? To make sure that the issues they care about can get covered. Finally, for both groups, and for the work today, I want to emphasize that there's a lot of potential for dialogue here, right? We hear a lot about political polarization in the United States today. We all have a sense that we live in a contentious political time, right? Where tensions are high, where identities are strong, where passions are heightened. But thinking about secular voters, thinking about religiously unaffiliated voters really presents an opportunity for dialogue, an opportunity where folks who are religiously affiliated and those who are unaffiliated can come together and talk about important policy issues in their communities. Right? There's a real opportunity here to bridge the gap across traditional partisan lines, across traditional religious lines, across traditional identity lines. There's an opportunity for dialogue here. So, with all that said, I want to welcome you to the National Day of Reason celebration. I want to thank you again for having me. And I hope you have a lovely afternoon.
All right, and now we are going to move into the candidate forum portion of today's event. Minnesota Atheists, we invited all of the candidates running for statewide positions, the statewide races, including Governor, Attorney General, Secretary of State, the 2 U.S. Senate seats, and State Auditor to address our organization and all the attendees of today's event. We asked them to answer one simple question: how will your personal views on religion be separated from how you administer our secular government? Candidates were asked for their talk to stay on topic and avoid partisan critiques of others or other parties. We have about 7 candidates that have agreed to come here and speak today, and we received letters from 2 candidates, which I will, one of the 2 candidates dropped out of the race, so I do not intend to read that one unless we need to fill time, but those who have attended in person get first go at addressing the group. They have 3 to 5 minutes to answer the question. And the question, one more time, I'll bring it up, is how will your personal views on religion be separated from how you administer our secular government? The first candidate to answer that question, I believe, is here, is Robert Barnheiser. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Rob Barnheiser. I'm running for U.S. Senate. I'm running for the Republican endorsement, and I'll be running against Amy Klobuchar. Here's my sign. So when I was asked to speak at this atheist forum today, I got real excited. As a former pastor, I'm like, wow, I couldn't drag you guys into church, so I got you here at the Capitol. You know. Honestly, though, my first job out of school, I was a minister, and I did it for 7 years. And people ask me, oh, why did you get out? And I always go, whoa, wait a second, man. Jesus only ministered for 3.5 years. And I went for 7. That's twice as long, and it's not even my cause, it's his. But I love the Lord. And so when I was asked this question, for me, it's intertwined. I base my life on a principle that's been written by 60 people over 4,000 years on what's the meaning of life. And that's my Heavenly Father. And with that, I like to think it guides me to be a moral person, an honest person. God said, go forth and multiply the earth. So my love over there, Jen, wave Jen. Between us, we have 9 kids, so we think we nailed that one, and we're moving on to the next one, I've never ran for politics before. Donald Trump kind of fired me up. I've seen how he is getting beaten up, not only by the Democrats and the Republicans, but I thought, you know what, as a small business owner and a former pastor, a Boy Scout leader, former firefighter, I thought, you know what, maybe I can go out there and help him. People ask me, do you agree about him on everything he does? And I'm like, no, I don't. A lot of his tweeting bugs the crap out of me, to be quite honest with you. And the way he approaches the Second Amendment rights, I don't like that either. So one thing about me being a minister is that I never got ordained. I only got licensed. Because when I got ordained, they said that I have to hit this code of a certain sect, of a certain religion, and I'm not about that. Jesus was never a Baptist or a Methodist or an Anabaptist, and I wasn't going to be either. So the Gideons asked me to be part of their team, and I'm probably the only guy that ever turned them down. And I never got ordained, and I don't regret it a minute. I'm here to love. I'm here to give you a positive speech about life. I'm here to let you know that I'm working for everyone here. So for example, being a staunch conservative, and I'm personally a libertarian on my own personal beliefs. What happens at my house stays at my house unless my wonderful love of my life over there puts it on Facebook. And people ask me, well, what do you feel about abortion? That's a hot one. For Christians, that's a hot one. I'm like, you know what? It's not even on the table. As me being pro-life, I'd like it to be pro-life, but you know what? Until a state prosecutes a woman for murder, which isn't going to happen, it's not even on the table. So I'm a constitutionalist, and I do it safe. I may not support abortion, but that's a woman's right. I'm not going to do anything to prevent her to do that until we change laws to do something else. So what would I do is that? I would educate. I would hope that no one used abortion as a form of birth control. I hope that we can educate more people if that's what you choose to do with your body, that we have this day after pill, which I think is a lot more ethical, I want to let you know, though, that as a Republican, I am in the inner city. Jackie Robinson just did 50 years here, just did his 50-year anniversary, and that's how long the Democrats have controlled downtown. And people say, why aren't the Republicans downtown? I always say, because they don't give a crap about you. That's why. They think you're untouchable. But I'm a new Republican. As a former pastor, I unite people. As a small business owner for the last 25 years, not only do I negotiate deals, I close deals, and I'm good at it. As a minority, Barnheiser, that's my last name, my mom's last name's Aguilar. I'm in the inner city, and I'm touching those people. And I said, you know what? I'm the new Republican. Schools in the inner city right now, if you're a white person in the inner city school right now, the dropout rate's 50%. If you're a minority, the dropout rate is 75%. And that's not good. So there's 3 things I want to go here for to Congress. My big things are, we need to revamp the schools in the inner cities. People got to get excited about educating again. We need to have tech schools in the inner cities. I want tech schools that are by minorities so they can see a successful minority teaching them something that will help them after school. I want to decriminalize pot because all we're doing is we're putting our inner city youth in prison, turning them into felons, and then they're not being able to get a job. And I want to take all that money that we'll make on taxing for pot and all the hundreds of millions of dollars we're spending putting these people in schools. I want to re-educate them. Oh, one more thing. And I want to keep our miners up on the range. I want to keep them working. My name's Rob Barnheiser. I'm running for U.S. Senate. I really appreciate the time here and that no one spit on me. God bless you guys, and thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, and our next candidate is running for the U.S. Senate. Thank you. For the Green Party candidate, Paula Overby.
Thank you. Yes, well, you know who I am. I just want to share some of my values with me. I'm an organizer for the Third Party Movement, the Third Party Coalition in Minnesota. We've been organizing for quite a while for the 2016 election. 2018. As a young child, I learned about a loving God through songs and pageants and miraculous stories of popular biblical events. As I entered my teen years, that loving God was replaced by a jealous God. And at the same time, I started realizing that I wasn't at all like the other boys. The school I was at separated me from the girls who I'd always known as my peers. And at that point in my life, my concept of faith in God and my values began to diverge. I can define my faith values in terms of a passage from the book of Matthew in the Protestant Bible. And that's, whatever you have done for the least among you, the hungry, the thirsty, the lonely, the naked, the sick, and the imprisoned, you have done for me. Now, some religious groups will argue that the least among us is just a select group of God's chosen ones. But I know that morality and social responsibility extends beyond the limits of religious doctrine. My faith in fundamental human rights transcends religious organizations. If policy was based on my faith, we wouldn't be engaged in endless wars or have millions unable to access health care or have the largest incarceration rate in the world. We wouldn't be worshiping wealth and creating poverty and destroying our environment. So I ask, what's the proper intersection of faith and politics? Our Constitution has decreed that Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. But in 1878, the Supreme Court in Reynolds versus United States ruled against polygamy. They were fearful of endorsing a full range of religious practices, including things like human sacrifice. And the court argued to permit this would be to make the professed doctrines of religious belief superior to the law of the land, and in effect, to permit every citizen to become a law unto himself. But that's exactly what's happening in America today. Through a series of Supreme Court decisions, including Citizens United, SpeechNow.org, Burwell versus Hobby Lobby, the Supreme Court has decided that corporations have the same constitutional rights as an individual citizen. Through the free exercise clause of the Constitution, they have decided that a corporation can disobey the laws of the land through a religious belief, which faces absolutely no challenge of merit. I don't know how a legal entity like a corporation can be sentient enough to hold a religious belief. And I'm thinking perhaps it's a precursor to granting sentient rights to robots so the oligarchy can manufacture millions of votes on the assembly line. Now, I admit that's a bit of futuristic dystopianism, but there is a point. An unquestioning faith in technology can have its own set of risks, and there is the potential to be used in destructive and abusive ways. It is as like Ian Malcolm said in the popular fantasy film Jurassic Park, your scientists were so busy worrying about whether or not they could, they didn't stop and think if they should. Religious doctrine has no bearing on how I would govern. I'm a data analyst. I reason by what I can observe. And I see a government being replaced by a corporate monarchy. I see the erosion of civil rights and due process through increased government surveillance and internet censorship. I see police with authority to gun people down in the streets. I see an entire generation of young people graduating into indentured servitude to that same corporate monarchy by unreasonable levels of debt. And I see our own children at risk of being shot dead in their own schools. Our wars are not making us free. Shareholder value is not solving our healthcare crisis. Prisons are not keeping us safe. We're not realizing the fruits of our labor, and the pursuit of profits should not come at the expense of our shared environment. I'm running for U.S. Senate for the future of our young people. I'm running for the U.S. Senate because I think it's time to put our house in order so that our children will have a home. Thank you.
Thank you, Paula Overby. Next, we will have the Libertarian candidate for State Auditor, Chris Dock, address the audience. Chris Dock.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the invitation to speak in front of you. Again, my name is Chris Dock. I'm with the Libertarian Party of Minnesota, and I'm our candidate for State Auditor. What I'd like to do first is specifically address the question at hand. How would I separate my own personal religious beliefs from my role if elected as State Auditor? Very easy answer. My religious beliefs are my own personal business. They have nothing to do with what I would do as State Auditor. And if I were elected and served my term of 4 years, at the end of that 4 years, nobody would have any clue what my religious beliefs are or aren't. It's kind of easy, I guess, as the candidate for State Auditor. Religion may not come up very often in that role. When you're looking at financial statements, accounting statements, pension investments, there may not be a lot of religious interpretation that happens there. But one of the things that I do want to do is put a focus on the appropriateness of spending within the municipalities, our cities, our counties, etc. And if there is spending that should not be occurring according to what the government should and shouldn't be doing, I'm going to call that out. And if that's religious spending, that's one of the things that lands on that list. So with my time, I'd also like to talk a little bit more about the Libertarian Party in general, because I am just one of the candidates, obviously, within the bigger party. One of the core beliefs and principles of the Libertarian policy is that individual freedoms take priority. That is the utmost importance in government's role. Obviously, we think government is way too big, way too much interaction in people's lives, and we want to reduce that drastically. But individual freedoms, if there is a role for government, it is to protect those freedoms. And one of those core freedoms of personal liberty is your religious beliefs, whether you choose to believe or not believe. That's nobody else's business but your own. If you have religious beliefs or non-religious beliefs and you choose to join a group that shares that vision, that's great, but that's not government. That's your own personal choice to join a group of people that think like you do. The government should not have anything to either support or defeat religious interpretation. And again, under that umbrella, I include religion and the belief that there is no religion or there is no God. That interpretation is up to each individual person to make for themselves. And again, that comes down to legislation and fiscal activity. So there should be no law that either supports or denies religious freedom. there should also, or I'm sorry, religious activity, there should also be no fiscal involvement in religious activity. So the government, even if there's not a law on the books that talks about a religion or lack thereof, the spending is also very important because that's actually where the activity is taking place in the real world. So I would look at that there may not be a law that says that the government is supporting a religious activity, but if they're spending money on it, they're doing it anyway. So again, it's a very simple philosophy. Basically, live and let live, do the right thing, live your life, leave other people alone to live their own lives. And as long as you're not doing something to infringe on another person's liberty, do whatever you think is best for yourself. I don't know what's best for yourself, you do, and the government sure doesn't. So again, in summary, Chris Dock, Libertarian Party, candidate for state auditor, and again, live and let live and live your life to be free. Thank you.
All right, we have 3 other candidates who said that they would be here, and Steve Peterson said that they aren't here yet. I'll call out their names just in case they are around. Running for the Independence Party, candidate for governor is James Everett. Is James Everett in proximity? We also have Democratic candidate for Attorney General, Matt Pelican, and Democratic candidate for State Auditor, John Tollerson said he would be here. I think Steve said that there'd be a few arriving about a little bit later, so in the meantime, I will read some of the written responses we received from candidates. And again, I'll remind any of those that are just now joining us, we asked candidates to answer one simple question, and that is, how will your personal views on religion be separated from how you administer our secular government? All right. Now we have a response from Julie Blaha. She is a Democratic candidate for state auditor. I will go ahead and read her response. I'm sorry I couldn't be with you in person today, but I appreciate the opportunity to tell you a little bit about myself by the way of this letter. My name is Julie Blaha, and I'm running for state auditor because I believe the best ideas come from those nearest to the situation. When they have the tools to make accurate, data-driven decisions, those ideas become reality. I think this holds especially true when we're talking about our local municipalities. I believe that the auditor's role in that progress is to provide the truth that Minnesotans can use close to home to make their ideas become real. I do not believe that religious views, my own or those of anyone else, have any role to play in analysis or dissemination of data. The auditor's greatest power is providing real, unbiased, accessible data. And that's Julie Blaha for DFL candidate for Minnesota State Auditor. Another response we received was from Jerry Truen. He's a candidate for U.S. Senate, independent. His response is, I believe the Constitution is explicitly clear about separation of church and state. I support that separation and was formerly on the board of Americans United for the Separation of Church and State. Jerry Truen, for U.S. Senate, Independent Party. All right. We did receive one response from a candidate who has dropped out. Being we received the response, I will go ahead and read it to you today. Just in case he decides to run for another position in the future, you can hear what his response was. This is from Keith Downey. He was a Republican candidate for governor. Dear Day of Reason attendees, thank you for the opportunity to write to you today. I am running for governor for a clear purpose, to make Minnesota work for everyone. I trust Minnesotans, not bigger government, for our future, and I believe in you. That stems from my own Christian faith and belief that each of us is created in the image of God. Each and every one at your event, each and every one in our state, and as such, you are infinitely valuable with creative potential, morally relevant, and accountable for your actions. That is the foundation of America. It is the basis for our constitutional system and Bill of Rights. That's why Republicans and our first Republican president, Abraham Lincoln, freed the slaves and gave them the right to vote. While we may not believe the same thing, you can trust that my faith that as governor, I will treat you exactly the same as any other person in our state. Exactly the same. I will defend your freedoms of conscience, religion, speech, and assembly. You will receive the same exact protections. I will fight for you and everyone else every day for your opportunity in life here in Minnesota. Again, I believe in you, and I believe that together we can truly make Minnesota work for everyone. Sincerely, Keith Downey. As Keith Downey, has since withdrawn, but a Republican candidate for governor. All right. Steve Peterson, did you say you have a few words, or? Oh yeah, we might as well jump ahead in our program. What was I thinking? All right, we have Minnesota Atheists member Steve Adams wrote a speech recently to address a committee hearing on a recent bill that had religious intentions. But before we hear Steve Adams, we will have a Democratic candidate for Attorney General, Matt Pelican, address this question.
Thanks, guys, for being here today. I just wanted to stop by and address you and introduce myself. My name's Matt Pelican. I'm a candidate for Minnesota Attorney General. And I just wanted to thank you for coming to the Capitol today and standing up on behalf of reason and for your own beliefs and values. Our system of government is founded on constraints and boundaries that tie our society together and place all kinds of limits on our leaders and provide guidance in how we can all benefit from a society. It depends on laws. It depends on, for many of our leaders, faith. It depends on many of our leaders and many of our founders on reason. And we're gathered here today at a time when we could use more of all three. There is not enough law in this country. We are seeing a federal government that believes in a rule of men and not of laws, that is unbounded by so many of the constraints that have empowered this country and allowed us to prosper and have equality. We have a president who very much sees himself as above the rule of law. We also, in other areas, have too little faith. I heard a great line today that the president pretends that he's a conservative evangelical so that conservative evangelicals can pretend they believe him. And this faith has given constraints and boundaries for many of our elected leaders, but we also see a deficit of that now in bad faith in too many leaders. And the last thing, and that what you are gathered here today, is reason. And reason is important for providing constraints in an objective reality and finding a common and shared truth that we can agree in through science, through deduction and logic. And we now see threats to the use of science in our national science organizations, including the EPA. We see threats and questions about what it means to have an objective reality when you have political leaders and a president who on a daily basis tell you that don't believe your lying eyes, believe what I'm telling you. And reason plays an essential role in how we will get through this and how we can all build a society together that has the essential elements of social democracy. And part of that is a shared truth and objective reality, which is now under tremendous assault. So I really support the mission of the Minnesota Atheists and standing up for that notion that reason and logic are essential in a society, and that our political government and our system of government should support peoples of all walks of life and all belief systems. So thank you for coming here today and sharing in this very important time in our democracy. So thank you very much.
All right. Next up is Minnesota Atheists member Steve Adams.
Good afternoon. E pluribus unum, out of many is one. This is our national motto and has been since we became a nation. In God We Trust as a motto was not established until 1956 as a scare to communism from the Soviet Union, who at the time had state atheism. This was just a knee-jerk Cold War reaction. Senator Dan Hall of Burnsville has penned a bill and is trying to get passed to have In God We Trust displayed in all Minnesota public schools. They're both House Finance 3665 and Senate Finance 3061. On April 15th of this year, Senator Dan Hall blatantly sent out an email asking support from his constituents on these bills. In his email, he actually stated, and I quote, "Please join us to encourage faith in our schools." We also have to note that he is getting support on this bill from the National Prayer Caucus and the Minnesota Prayer Caucus, whose focus has and is to put prayer in public schools. We also have to note that Senator Dan Hall is co-chair of the Minnesota Prayer Caucus. This makes it very clear that what he's wanting to do is put a Christian religion in public school and not simply educate students of our national motto, or educate students of that national mottos. This is an opening for religious discrimination in the public school system. On the evening of April 16th, I posted the information of this legislation to a small neighborhood message board. And within a few hours, there was over 60 responses of arguments showing just how divisive this bill can be with adults. And this was just one small area in Crystal, Minnesota. One person very eloquently posted, and I have to agree, our schools have students from many different countries, cultures, and religions. To assert that one of these ideologies is superior to another in a school setting may perpetuate the kind of atmosphere we are seeing at the root of so much strife in our country, one of supremacy of culture, race, or religion over another. Many Christians see the term God as a neutral for all religions. The truth is, God is not a neutral or benign term to the world's religions and beliefs, which are represented in the children that attend our public schools. The term God is divisive and can be found very argumentative, as we are witnessing every day. If you want children to learn, you need to create an environment of inclusion everywhere. Then if this bill passes, will circumvent that. We also have to address the huge waste of money this bill would be. It would put more money, if we really want to put more money into our schools, we need to spend it in a way that actually improves the education in those classrooms. rather than waste money to put a sign that states one ideology of religion is better than someone else's. I ask that you let your elected officials know that this is not acceptable legislation and that this would be a massive waste of money that could be better suited to improve our education, as this will lead to litigations against those school systems and take money out of our classrooms. Thank you.
All right. Sorry for leaving the podium unattended for a moment. We have a couple local Minnesota representatives that have graciously come down to address our group. They have done so for the last few years. So it's Mike Freiberg and Raymond Den.
Thank you all for being here. I'm State Representative Mike Freiberg. I represent all our parts of Crystal, Golden Valley, New Hope, and Robbinsdale in the Minnesota House. I appreciate you guys being here every year just to keep us reminded about the importance of science being the main thing to focus our legislation on, and just reminding us that, not everyone feels the same way about issues, of religion or morality. And so I think it's really, we need to recognize the separation of church and state that's in the First Amendment. So I believe that very strongly. So thank you all for being here. I'd love to stay longer. We are in the middle of a debate with amendments going on right now, and I have one coming up. So I would stay longer, but I wanted to make sure to say hi. I appreciate you guys being here every year. So I just want to make a point to come and say hi whenever you're here. So thank you.
Hi, I'm State Representative Raymond Dean. I represent areas of Minneapolis, including most of downtown and the southern part of North Minneapolis. And I really wish we were in the middle of the debate, because that means we'd be out of here soon. I actually think we're really starting in the meat of the debate, but we could be here long after many of you are leaving this evening. I too want to thank all of you for being here today. We seem to be at a point where our government is confusing itself with religion. And I think that's being used in many ways to appeal to what some people might say is a majority of the population, that's how government's supposed to work. Well, we all know that the European founding fathers of our country made some decisions on how they were going to set up our Constitution. And the notion of prescribing to or being part of any particular religion was not part of that. Matter of fact, they exclusively worked to make sure that wasn't what the foundation of our modern government in this country was based on. So, when I've spoken in the past, I've talked about how sometimes being an atheist or someone who doesn't believe in a particular religion can actually be much, much more difficult, because every day you wake up and you have to evaluate the world. You need to make decisions on what is right and wrong based on something that's internal to you and those things that you truly believe in, versus just turning to a scripture and says, oh, here, the scripture says this is how I'm supposed to act and this is what I'm supposed to do. So like Representative Freiberg, I believe that we need to use science. Science is just not some willy-nilly thing that people have thought up to sort of justify their way of seeing the world. It's actually a process that not only takes initial analysis, but also allows it to be tested many, many, many times. And unfortunately, in the body that I'm in the House of Representatives, it seems to not have much of an impact. So I encourage all of you to talk to your legislators, to make sure that they know that not all of their constituents may not prescribe to a particular faith or believe in a particular omnibus being that choreographs all we do in the world, and that you all have just as critical of a place in this Capitol as any of the other faith groups that come here and believe that, you know, government should be one way. So again, thank you for everything you do. I will show up whenever I'm able to be, because you all also need to know that there are legislators here that are fighting for a world that, you know, does not signify some religious basis on which we all exist and what we all do our things. So again, thank you all, and thank you, Heidi, for having us come down.
All right. Next, member Steve Peterson. He's a longtime member of Minnesota Atheists. He will address the audience.
I think first thing we should thank Heather for the work she's done as MC. We appreciate it. I was going to say, is John here? I don't think, okay. John Tollefson, all right. So anyway, as we're thinking about the Day of Reason and why we're here, and we're here to help have support for people like Raymond Dean and Mike Freiberg. And before that, for many years, we had Phyllis Kahn who came. The ironic thing, the very first person who ever came was Secretary of State Kiffmeyer, who, when we first started this, she was addressing the Day of Prayer as Secretary of State, so we asked her to come in and address us, and she did. She's addressed us 3 times. She's never said anything that we've particularly liked or agreed with, except that we have the right to be here, but we still appreciate that she gave us the respect and time to do that with us. So the Day of Prayer resolution is the same one they passed last year. It's almost the same year after year. And just so you're wondering how included we are in this government, they're recognizing the first Thursday in May as a day of prayer, fasting, and repentance. So I'm sure you all want to start your fasting. If you missed it if you had lunch. And I saw all the food trucks out there, so I suspect everybody else missed the fasting part also. And how they do this is George writes about this when we gave testimony against the In God We Trust that you heard from Steve Adams, his testimony. They utilize different aspects of historical records. A creator is mentioned in the Declaration, they turned it into their God. The first Congressional Congress had a prayer, they turned it into, that's why you have a day of prayer. Different founders had religious beliefs that they talk about, they turned it into their religious beliefs. And Abraham Lincoln, who utilized God in a very shrewd way from our perspective, they use it as an endorsement of their view of God. That relates to the money. So, and this is all part of the resolution. And so in the day of prayer, it's an observance for all citizens. So I guess each of you are observing the day of prayer. Apparently we're doing it by Sue Ellen's shaking her head. She's a dissenter. So I just looked up Googled a few Jefferson quotes this morning, which are easy to find. And Jefferson had a lot to say about the day of prayer because he was specifically asked to endorse it, of which he did not. So one, he says, civil powers alone have been given to the President of the United States, and no authority to direct religious exercises of his constituents. Well, okay, he's saying religious beliefs is really the providence of each of us as individuals. And I would think from my perspective, one thing I didn't do when I gave testimony on the In God We Trust was to say that if you want government to endorse your religious belief, it's probably going to make more atheists in the long run because we're all skeptical of government and we don't really trust the word of government. And if you're going to make government as the promoter of your God, you're probably going to lose followers faster than we can gain them. Jefferson also went on to say, this was in the Danbury Baptist letter, where he did the famous thing about the wall. But he said, I do not believe it is in the interest of religious to invite the civil magistrate to direct its exercises, its discipline, or its doctrine, nor of the religious societies that the general government should be invested with the power of affecting any uniformity of time or manner among them. He's pretty clear from his perspective. So here we have one of the founders who has a completely differing point of view. But as the course of things, and George writes about his analysis of the In God We Trust testimony, where they use historical things to kind of snowball why they should put more God into the legislation and into the laws. And it's a very difficult thing to kind of counter unless you have constitutional experts that you can get on a moment's notice to get up there and testify against it. Steve's analysis was actually pretty unique, and he put it out in his neighborhood forum, and instantly it turned into a divisive conversation. And I think that that's reflective of how it would work in most communities. August talked about how it would, August Berkshire talked about how it would contribute to the bullying of students that are non-believers who may have their point of view and say, well, I don't really think that In God We Trust should be sitting on the school walls. And now you've got another moment of divisiveness, and suddenly you're pitting people apart based on their ideology point of view. And you really have to wonder, the schools should be about educating about critical thinking more than it should be about dividing people out. And I'm not sure how it brings people together. So it's a hard thing when you go and you see legislation that's enacted here. The In God We Trust was amended into the education policy bill. It's not in the House bill, so it'll be part of a conference committee. Public testimony can be taken from time to time in conference committees. It's hard to figure out sometimes where they go. It might be that we should write to the governor and say, hey, you should tell your negotiators to make sure this comes out of the bill so it's not in the final draft. And that's still a possibility. Maybe not the easiest thing to go ahead and take on, but it's something that we might want to try and do, each of us as individuals. And until it's law, it still hasn't passed. No. And I hand it back to Heather. I think that's pretty much all I have.
I did get a phone call from one of our candidates saying that he's on his way, so we'll see if he can get here in time to address the group. And we do have a little bit of extra time. We have an attendee said that she is intending to run for U.S. Senate and is interested in addressing the audience. Are you still interested in addressing the audience? We'll give her the 3 to 5 minute period to speak and answer the question, how will your personal views on religion be separated from how you administer our secular government? This is Ray Grin. She's running for she wants to run for U.S. Senate.
People often ask me, how did you get a name like Grimm? Do you think anyone would elect you? And I said, well, it used to be Anderson, and I was always overlooked as one of those. So now I'm trying Ray. And they said, well, now are you a boy or a girl? And I said, if you can't tell, that's all right with me. So now I thought maybe I should use all three names, Ray, Anderson, Grimm. Actually, I'm a senior citizen, and when you're a senior citizen, you can wear a red hat, but that's not why I'm wearing a red hat. I'm wearing a red hat today because I went to the Salvation Army and bought it. And my husband paid $3 for it, and I was out in the sun, so I wore it. So as a candidate, I don't have $10 million, and I've understood that the Atheist Society has the most money to run for the Senate, so I really wanted to come down here and meet you in person. Can you hear me as I'm speaking? Because I can't even hear myself, it's so pleasant. I married a Missouri Synod Lutheran guy who almost got kicked out of church because he asked his pastor a question. Well, he's still in the church, but he asked his pastor, did Moses have bees on the ark? Simple. What would you say? How many think he did? Raise your hand. How many think he didn't? Raise your hand. You're all right, because Moses was a baby in an ark, and it was Noah that was choosing all the bees. So his pastor laughed a little bit. So you might say, how can I be fair to people? I'm a licensed teacher in Minnesota and California. I'm a licensed women's health nurse practitioner, pro-life, definitely. Mary Kiffmeyer's my friend. Worked in the prisons in Minnesota, and I have never been told that I'm invading anybody's rights. In fact, I met one of my first students from Hinckley, Minnesota, just a couple weeks ago, and I said, did you think I was a religious teacher? And he goes, absolutely not. So I don't know if that's good or bad, but as a Christian, I am so happy to have met you. I am a born-again Christian, so I'm not the same as when I was born the first time, and I joined Nicodemus in John 3. And I believe that everybody, you look in the mirror, there's no one like me. Some people say good, and there's no one like you. So even snowflakes have their own identity. And thank you for this time.
All right, and to spend a little bit more time, in the meantime, we will read the press release that we sent out regarding today's event. Were you thinking?
We'll just do it together.
Yeah.
You can read. So we did a couple press releases. We do have, we were both on the Mike McGinty show on AM 950. It's on from 4 to 5. And we actually are going to be on live tomorrow at 4:35. If anybody's listening, they want people to call in. They had lots of, we pre-recorded, and it's going to be recorded a lot. They're done live because they got lots of phone calls. So I give apparently atheists generate interest. But we did a press release and over this event, and the interesting thing, the press was interested that we only asked one question. And Heather had a take on why we asked only one question, and I had one, each slightly a little bit different. Go ahead.
Well, I mentioned just the one question is because we just have an hour here to spend, and having candidates answer one question makes it really, really focused and allows us it to not be a drawn-out thing and to answer a question that we really care about. How will you administer our government and keep your religious beliefs separate from your position representing us? Because it's okay, we can elect people of faith. Just because they have faith doesn't mean that they're going to administer the government in that fashion.
I just want to say, so our time will go to 2:45, which is 5 minutes. So one person had said that he wanted to get here and he was on his way, but if he's not here by 2:45, we have to stop. So on the question, what I thought was interesting when the board came up with the idea that atheism is nonpartisan, that's part of why we're here and how we conduct this event, and how we went forth in this. We thought we'd do the candidate forum. The board, I think, did a nice job in coming up with a question that could be answered completely different from a lot of different candidates, and that's part of what we saw here today. And Evan Stewart's analysis of who the unaffiliated voter is and who the atheist voter is and who the nuns are is always something of interest. I've sent that around to some of the legislators to say, you might be interested in us as a voting bloc, because we may not be in a similar area, but you find when one group is going more and more towards a theocratic system, the secular voter becomes more and more interesting. And at 20 to 30% of the voting bloc, you would think somewhere along the line we'd have the power to control some of the elections. Whether the speaker agreed or disagreed wasn't as relevant as that they took the time to stand in front of this atheist sign and they had to think differently. Our first speaker was out at the day of prayer. He had to think differently to come here and speak to us. If somebody like that gets elected, that's somebody that we may have an opportunity to talk to and say, this law impacts a group of your citizens in a different manner. And if you don't put a face before the legislators, they will never get the idea. Minnesota Atheist shows up occasionally to testify. We're doing that to put a face on somebody who is impacted negatively on their law that they're trying to enact. And I think that's what we continually have to do. You get respect out of being who you are, being authentic and being honest. And that's the way we approach it. And when you look at Raymond Dean, who comes down here, or Mike Freiberg, they don't get anybody else who's going to cheer for their separation of state and church. Legislators who say they're non-religious, they might lose their election. But the ironic thing about this is it hasn't impacted anybody's election. We had Mark Ritchie, as Secretary of State, who spoke here, and he was terrified to give the talk. I think this is our man right here. You're sick of listening to me, but this is James Everett.
All right. James Everett has arrived. He is running as a candidate he is an Independence Party candidate for governor. James Everett.
Let me catch my breath first. I was like, I gotta make it over here. Because when I think about, we talk about discrimination, bear with me for a second, I'm gonna catch it while I'm going. When I think about discrimination, I think about under God, the things that we had to say in our pledge every day. When I grew up, I was born here and raised in Texas. I was brought back here when I was 8 years old. And we had to do the national anthem and the Yellow Rose of Texas and all the songs. And I did always notice that God was a major theme. I was raised at the Unity Church, Henry Thoreau. I've been to Eckankar. I've been in Christianity. I've been a part of Islam. What I realized, though, was that the investment in self and self-accountability, as religion was maturing, the investment in self and people's self-accountability without looking for external things to hold accountable was dwindling. It wasn't developing. And that's very important in the process. One of my friends is one of the close friends that I work with, always challenged my view on God. He said, how do you know there's a God? I said, well, I'm not sure if he's there, but it sure feels better to think someone's got my back than I'm here by myself. I said that I need to be accountable to something, and what I was taught was that the concept of God was created as something that we could build into, something that we could put to hold ourselves accountable, and then step into, and then fear because we created that fear around it. I always challenge people that think that they're great people to say that if you were invisible, how good of a person would you be? Think about it. So when we speak for external forces, and when I look at new data around alternate realities and digital realities, there's now proof, they say, that we live in a digital reality, meaning that everything, if it was analog, there wouldn't be coincidences, everything would roll on. But the fact that there's coincidences and the fact that there's deja vu means that something's on a loop, and finding synchronicities and putting them together. And so that concept then makes it say, well then, who's the programmer? And then who's that person's programmer? I think too long that religion has been used as a way to divide people. Even people get mad at me when I say Jesus was a Jew by birth, a Muslim by worship, and a Christian by the teachings that came from him. They stop and go, oh, I don't know. It's all left to interpretation most of the time. So out of all the meetings I had to get to, I wanted to get here today and have some real conversation as a Minnesotan and as someone who understands the fight for people that have a voice that is not necessarily that popular. I went a lot of different ways. If you check my book out, The Compassionate Rebel Revolution by Bert Berlow, if you check out the book, it talks about my journey, my numerology, and it's all tied into it. I would really like to know what you guys think about the book. It talks about some of my spiritual journey. But what I learned, no matter if there's a God or not, favor's not fair. And favor does fall upon us at different times, and we're called to do something. And as a person who's from Minnesota, who understands the complexity of this, the Wellstone Camp, a lot of the work that they've done was built off of our inner city organizing. I'm a North Side guy, but I hung out most of the time in the Boundary Waters. And I believe as Minnesotans, we're individually smart and collectively stupid. And we need to work together in a different way. So I look forward to having some conversation. I see this, she's coming, the boss lady's coming. But I wanted to get here because I do respect everyone's voice. And there's a reason there hasn't been any debates lately. They can't keep up with my ADHD. It's not happening that easily. I was born to do this. I was raised to do this. Check me out, James Everett, E-V-E-R-E-T-T. Thank you. I look forward to hearing anybody's views. I'll be here until the last person leaves. Thank you for the opportunity.
And thank you to all the candidates who came out today to address our audience and the camera, and for all those candidates that sent in their written response, and also for James Everett for giving our welcome. Thank you. And with that, we are out of time. So thank you for attending this year's Day of Reason.